And it's a beautiful afternoon here. We're getting hot into the Israeli summer here in Tel Aviv. My name is Danny Lieberman. I'm the host of Life Sciences Today. It's a pleasure to host Viraj Narayanan in New York, right?
I'm in New York. That's right.
Okay, so
Also very hot here.
yeah, I bet it is in more ways than one. And we're here to talk about your company, Cornerstone AI, and what you're doing. And it sounds really, really interesting. I won't spoil it because we spoke a little bit beforehand. So let's get started with the podcast and talk about your journey. How what was the point that you decided this is something you must do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Danny. I've listened to the podcast and really enjoyed the stories. And I'm so much of a believer that it's going to take a village to improve healthcare, and we need all of us. And hearing the various stories of people that are trying to make an impact to improve the healthcare system is inspiring. So I'm happy to be here. Grateful for the opportunity. So I'm a decision scientist by training, MBA. I started my career working on the bench of a biotech. I've always been interested in how people make decisions, i.e., that's why I studied decision science, and I'm happy to tell you more about decision science. And one of my informative experiences early on was effectively when I was working on the bench of a biotech, I sort of came to this realization I want to be close to research, but probably not a researcher. And spent about a decade then in consulting with actually a consulting firm that was started by a decision scientist. It was a guy, Paul Schumacher, who I read his book in undergrad at Carnegie Mellon. And I found out that he had this consulting practice that was applying a lot of the frameworks that I had learned about in undergrad, focused in on helping healthcare and pharma companies with those frameworks of thinking long term about uncertainties and trends in the market and how to effectively build strategies to be more outside in versus inside out.
Right.
It was around that time I had just finished my MBA. I really had an itch to be less advising and be more doing. It felt like that was sort of one hypothesis I had. Another was that it felt like data and technology just had a lot more scale in terms of my impact and time. Like I sort of was thinking about input to output and what could, in consulting, you're sort of constrained by time. It's H times R, hours times rate. And
Yeah,
it's like this
exactly.
technology thing feels like it could have a lot more, I could have a lot more output with my
Yeah.
time. And I started that journey at a company called Coda, which was focused on effectively getting unstructured data out of electronic medical records of cancer patients to learn from those patient records. I then had the opportunity to run the biopharma business at a much larger company, McKesson, which is most known for drug distribution. They had some new businesses, which they called basically like their growth businesses focused in oncology. And so that was a much larger business in scale. And it was at that business that I learned about the problem that I'm now solving at Cornerstone, which was I was probably your naive business person who didn't appreciate how much of a plumbing issue that we have in healthcare data. And it led me down this rabbit hole of learning more and more about the problem. Just to give you maybe a brief snapshot of what I experienced and the pain, and then what led me down the rabbit hole. I had in this business at McKesson 25 PhD biostatisticians who spent 70% of their time doing data cleaning like tasks. I don't think they got PhDs to be doing that kind of work. I had less so on the data science front, probably closer to 10 to 13 data scientists who spent about a third of their time in what you
Cleaning.
could characterize data cleaning work. And then I had ambitions to build these new products, and I met with the product manager, and the long pole in the tent was this thing called data mapping. And so it impacted me in a very, like it impacted the P&L, it impacted ability to deliver to customers faster. And I went down this rabbit hole of learning more and more about the problem. I realized the problem was not unique to me. It's actually an industry problem. It is because we've got so much heterogeneity in healthcare data. We have so much difference in the requirements from stakeholders where information is being generated to where information is being consumed. You have the complexity of healthcare data being governed by HIPAA in the United States. You've got the complexity of healthcare data being passed from one entity to another entity to another entity to another entity, and then eventually someone who's consuming that information. There's all these reasons why, and there's basically been no innovation in this space for decades, multiple decades. And the old way of doing it is effectively highly technically trained folks applying manual rules to wrangle, remove duplicates, standardize, QC healthcare data. And I met the folks at Cornerstone who were, I was a business person who had experienced the pain. They were the technical people that were doing that work.
Aha.
And they were frustrated too. And they basically had the hypothesis that this was a ripe use case for AI to automate a lot of the steps that previously had been highly manual. And so I joined the company a year and a half ago, and the company has developed a system that effectively automates many of these steps that often are manual and are technical labor intensive. And our goal is basically to, when you think about the space we operate in, it's right before or when you're ready to acquire data to preparing it for analysis. That's like that space. And we think that space has just been underserved. And if
You,
we can get
you
that right,
think? You think it's been underserved?
yeah,
You
we
think,
know it's
huh?
been underserved. And we're not eliminating, by the way, human in the loop and oversight. It's actually a key part of our system, but we just think it can be a lot faster.
For
And
sure.
simultaneously, we can improve outputs. We can also improve the quality of data. So it's been a lot of fun, and yeah, happy to share more. But that's sort of my journey of how I got here.
So that's an amazing story because it's actually a totally non-sexy application of AI. Everybody's talking about, drug discovery and,
Yep.
you know, chemical molecule modeling and stuff like that. And then here's this totally non-sexy, low-tech problem that real-world data is basically not putting it in a politically correct kind of way. It's shit. Okay. And we had in my previous company, we were like clinical data management in the cloud. So we were working in clinical
Yep.
trial space, but data cleaning was important. So we had developed systems to automate GCP monitoring, good clinical
Yep.
practice monitoring. So one of the big HCPs in Israel came to me and said, how cool would it be if you could take your system and point it at data from our EMR?
Yep.
I said, okay, that sounds like fun. And we did that. And like 3 days later, we came back to them and we said, I have good news and bad news. And she said, well, what's the good news? Was the good news it wasn't so hard. The bad news is that your data is worthless. And you have all kinds of outliers there. You have all kinds of illogical things there, all kinds of, and we were taking very narrow indication relating to,
Right.
without going into details. And they like narrowed the focus for this pilot. And even within this totally narrow, within like 2 days, we came back and we said, we're very sorry, but the data that you have is worthless. Okay. And so, if you want to work with us and, deploy this, sort of forward deploy this into your own systems and use this to sort of get early warning, get better feel, just, without trying to be too over promise. But if you want to use our system to get a feel for where you have areas for improvement, and I was being, charitable with them, I said, we'd be happy to work with you and do that. But they said, no, no, it's okay. We get the idea. Okay. So it's like, it's the kind of thing where when you talk to people about this, it's like, oh, yeah, we knew that. And I would say, like, oh yeah, if you knew that, then how come you haven't done anything about it? Okay.
I
So
think, yeah, I think, well, it's one of those problems, as you're pointing out, that it's just a less visible problem. I refer to it a little bit like a plumbing problem, in that when you're in your house or your apartment or wherever you are, you turn on your faucet, you get water out at the right time, at the right temperature, the right velocity, and you sort of take that for granted. It's not visible to you how that happens. The pipes, like, they're all buried within the infrastructure, but in the absence of having that in place, none of it sort of operates. It's not the kitchen counter. It's not, the beautiful backdrop to the stove. It's not the front door. It's really the plumbing. And as you're pointing out, as a result of that, it is a less visible problem, but nonetheless, we think an incredibly important one.
I totally agree with it, which is why I was really excited to get you on the show. So let's move on to the next question, which I I'm totally curious to understand. So first of all, who are your customers and what's your, how do you create value for them with your technology?
Yeah, so our customers split into three segments. So one is pharmaceutical and biopharma companies, and that is our long-term growth driver. They have this problem in spades. They are huge. You think about the role of a pharma or a life science company, they are healthcare data consumers in a very major way, in that they are both bringing in data externally, but they're also running trials on their own. And so they've got this problem across the enterprise in a very pervasive way. So pharma companies is one critical stakeholder that we serve. The second stakeholder are data companies that are producing data that ultimately pharma is consuming. So they can embed our technology into their data pipelines to improve their output
For
and
example,
increase.
like who's an example of a data company?
An example of a data company could be like a Komodo Health or a Diaceutics or Loopback, which happen to be actually real customers of Cornerstone. And so I'll give you an example. Maybe we'll just double click on this for a second. So one area that we're supporting those three companies, Komodo Health, Diaceutics, and Loopback, is with laboratory data cleanup. So laboratory data happens to be one of the messier areas of healthcare data. When I say laboratory data, I'm not talking about genomic data, biomarker data. I'm talking about
Blood.
you go to get your blood drawn for your PCP checkup, your physician checkup. Yeah, exactly. And one of the key organizing principles of laboratory data and the dictionary in healthcare that it is concordant to, is this thing called LOINC. And LOINC is a code that basically represents like 6 different clinical attributes that tells you a lot about what lab test was performed, how was it measured, tells you about the unit, the system. It tells you all of these things in this one code. It's actually a really powerful clinical concept that when coded, tells you a lot of information. The challenge is that it's not coded often. And so as a result of that, it is hard to query and find relevant patient records for a particular diagnosis that you might be interested in. And so just to give and maybe to make this really concrete, we see laboratory data coded, sometimes 20, 30% fill rates of LOINC assignments. And what we'll do with our customers is we'll say, hey, let's take a sample of your laboratory data and let's see how we can improve performance for you. And so one key really objective thing that you can measure for performance is, what is your coverage of LOINC assignments? So if you're at 20 or 30%, if we can take you to 80 or 90%, all of a sudden you have these LOINC assignments where you had zero coverage previously. You also have the fact that teams were doing that manually before, and covering a smaller part of the laboratory universe because that's the way that this has been done historically. A lot of deterministic what if rules. We're looking at all of the long tail of laboratory tests. And so in the example, this is segment two, data companies, what a typical engagement model looks like is effectively we'll leverage our system to create the LOINC predictions. We have a very high confidence prediction threshold, and we calibrate that based on our customer requirements, but we have our own point of view as well. And then they can embed that into their data pipeline, and ultimately it benefits the biopharma customers.
Cool. That's like layering meaning into existing data.
It's layering meaning into existing data. It's saving a researcher a considerable amount of time once they receive that file because they can identify the patients much faster. They can identify attributes, and it actually increases the volume of records that are relevant for a particular question.
Of
So
course.
that's segment two. And then segment three are third parties that are working with pharma companies that can embed our solution um, within their platform. So an example of this might be a consulting company that's saying, I'm bringing together Flatiron Health and Concert AI and a registry, and I want to harmonize that data. Ultimately, I'm going to be providing research analysis to the pharma customer, but I need help with the harmonization problem, the data prep harmonization problem of stacking those three different data sets together. I need help with QAing those data sets so they can leverage us within their embed us within their overall solution to pharma. But all of this is all three segments, pharma companies being one, two being data companies, three being third parties. The umbrella is pharma and pharma research and analytics. And we want to make pharma research and analytics faster, cheaper, and more productive. And we think there's a real opportunity to do that. And we're seeing that with our current engagements with customers.
I bet you are. I have no question that you are. And certainly it's a need and the kind of thing which I think all of the industry has known for years. And I'm just curious, I just something that's popped through my head. So there's a number of really big data providers like Optum. So, Optum and even IQVIA were actually IQVIA, it was Quintel and then IMS basically merged with them and
Yeah, that's right.
they took them over. I think I looked at their P&L the other day and I see that actually surprisingly I thought it was mostly IMS business now, but actually the clinical trial service business is actually like two-thirds of their P&L. On the other hand, uh, I think that one-third of the data business is far more profitable than the clinical trial services.
The margin's probably
The
higher.
margins are way higher because
Yep.
it's more as there's more, technology. So what does a company like Optum or formerly IMS, what did they do? I mean, met IMS years ago, they were like going to pharmacies and collecting data from pharmacies on drug usage. I mean, I'm sure they have much better ways. But what do they do? I mean, they're the mamas and papas of real world data, right?
Yeah, and is your question what is their perspective on this particular topic or
No,
more?
what did they do? How did they get clean real world data? Because Optum has $1 billion a year business selling real world data to people. So what did they do? How did they clean the data today?
Yeah. Well, I think that the current system is very much a throwing technical labor at the problem oriented solution. So you usually have, like I shared with you my experience at a prior company, you have a set of stakeholders in the technology side of the business that are typically, and this is part of why this is like a system level issue, is you've got technology stakeholders on one hand, and then you have the consumers that are more externally facing on the other hand. And so the technology stakeholders on one hand are usually managing what they call like the data platform for the company, like at an Optum or an IQVIA, or in my instance, a McKesson. And then you have stakeholders that are closer to the customer that are ultimately servicing the end customer pharma. And on my hand, I was on that side of the business at McKesson, and the same stakeholder exists at IQVIA or in Optum. And I think the challenge and where this becomes a system level issue is that the requirements that they're managing on the left-hand side of the house often don't match the requirements on the right-hand side of the house. And so what you end up having is a bunch of resources on the right-hand side of the house that are applying additional rules on top of the data to get it into that, let's call it 80% to 99%, and ultimately shipping it out. So it's not being thought of as a system level view. It's being thought of much more as a bespoke sort of project-based view. And that works, by the way, because to your point, it's very high margin. It's just that you're missing out on productivity gains in this new world that we're living in, that where AI-based solutions can accelerate considerably timelines and actually improve the ultimate output that you're creating. But
So
we
that
see,
brings so that brings us directly into the value creation part. So the value creation is that you're three kinds of customers: the farmers, the data providers, and the third-party service companies. So basically, they're doing this to get what? What do you give them?
yeah, so we have two parts, we have two aspects of our system. So the first one, and I'll give you an example on the first side, is assessing and characterizing data. The second part of our system is making improvements to the data, tangible improvements to the data, or like acting on things that you need to do to the data, removing duplicates, standardizing, harmonizing, QCing across multiple data sets. But let me give you an example on the former one of assessing and characterizing data. So the reason that this matters is pharma companies are purchasing more and more data, and they're bringing in more and more data, whether it's on the real world data side or on the clinical trial side. And one of the first steps that a team has to do when new data comes in is to profile it. How many patients do I have in this data set?
Right.
What is the level of standardization? What is the completeness of this data? So how is this being done today? The way that it's being done today is there's a couple of different incumbent, I like think of this as what's the incumbent position? The incumbent position today is there's either a consulting company that is doing that for the pharma company, that when a new data set comes in, they send it off and they'll profile it for the pharma company, and they'll say, here's a data quality report. Or internal teams are in a bespoke way creating their own rules to profile the data. So I'll give you an example from one of our actual pharma customers, which is they are a top 5 pharma company, and this is on the real world data side. They have a centralized real world data group. Their budget is over $100 million annually on real world data. So it's like not nothing that they're spending on real world data. And they're pretty sophisticated in their real world data. So they historically were using a consulting company to get those data quality reports. Now, here's the rub of where that incumbent position was not great for them. Every single time they needed to get a data quality report, data came to them. They had to send it then to the consulting company. The consulting company would then create what they would call a data quality assessment report. It would come back. On average, that would take between 8 and 12 weeks for one report. And if there were questions that they had on that report,
Another cycle.
another cycle, and it's H times R. And they were paying annually many millions of dollars to this consulting company. This consulting company had a book, by the way, for a long time with this pharma customer. So we started engaging with this pharma company, and we basically had the hypothesis we can do the same thing as this consulting company, but we can do it way faster. And perhaps more importantly, instead of each time getting a bespoke report, we can create an elegant software solution for you where you can dynamically look at data query it, and analyze it in a unified and consistent approach. So you have a unified, consistent data quality perspective in the enterprise. And we tested the hypothesis out with a paid pilot, and their socks were knocked off. They were like, "Wait, you can do this in days versus 12 weeks? Days?" They actually didn't even believe it at first. They had to see it in the pilot and see the results. And after the pilot, they basically said, "We're going to cancel the entire contract with that consulting company, and we want to use your software." And so we installed our software in their AWS environment. And now their team, instead of each time calling and by the way, they didn't want to deal with consultants. They wanted just to have output, and they didn't want to bill at each time they had a question. So instead of getting a H times R bill now, anytime they have a data quality assessment, they can do it in days versus 12 weeks. They can get it in a consistent manner, and they can do it on their own without necessarily having an external party there. And so that's the type of value. And by the way, a fraction of the cost,
And
fraction of the cost.
and one more thing you didn't mention, and our listeners will want to understand this, that what you do is scalable. In other words, you can handle volume of data. You can handle, I'll exaggerate this, but you can handle 100,000 patients as fast as you can handle 100 patients, right?
Correct.
It's
That's
it,
that's
and
that.
in the old manual technical way of, shipping it out, it means that it's not scalable. And if God forbid they would have like a huge data set, then it wouldn't be 8 to 12 weeks. It might be 8 to 12 months. Okay. So
Yeah, and as someone that was on the data company side, I can tell you, I actually worked with this pharma company on the data company side. It was very frustrating as it's someone that is trying to get pharma to sell or to purchase your product. You're sort of sitting there like, okay, now we're in this, like we've done a lot of work on the relationship. We've built trust. We understand the use cases. They're going to be leveraging this. And then they would say, hey guys, we're going to have to wait for 8 to 12 weeks to get back to you on an answer of how we view your data quality. Because we would get the data companies would give a data sample or a cut of the data to do this process. It would be so frustrating. And this is like, I think, emblematic. If you've been in healthcare, I sort of think of it as like there's so much friction in the system today. There's so much friction in the system, and this is like a great example of friction that exists, and we want to reduce that friction. Like we all deserve this friction to be reduced
that's
because
right.
it shouldn't take, things should not take as long as they do.
So your value creation is basically you're doing it faster and cheaper and without friction and the annoyance that you have when you deal with external service providers or having to do it yourself and reinvent the wheel every time. So I'm not sure what's more important, the money, the financial side or the emotional side, but there is, and you're not the first person who's pointed this out to me, that there's just a lot of frustration, and you used that word several times in the course of the conversation. So it's extremely frustrating to a farmer to have to deal with this stuff. Um, so let's go on to the value capture question. So
Hmm.
you create a lot of value. It's cheaper, it's faster, it's scalable, it's a lot more fun. Um, so how do you capture value? How do you capture that value back? And you seem to have a few different delivery models.
Yeah, we have a few different delivery models. The two primary ones are software. So customers we have a software so we have a front end and we have a back end. The back end is where data is processed, it's where algorithms exist. That's not exposed to customers, but that's what powers. Those are the algorithms that power our system. And then we have a front end where users can upload data into our system and run the data on their own. And so we basically have two different engagement models. We have one where, and I just gave you the example of this, where a customer really wants to learn the full end-to-end software so they can operate it on their own without Cornerstone being there. They want to be trained on it, and they have applications that they're interested in. And so in those instances, we'll typically install our software within AWS. I use AWS as the example because they're sort of the dominant player in cloud-based solutions for pharma. I think they're in 19 of the top 20. And so we have experience working with AWS, and we have technical configuration alignment. And so there's not that much friction, but typically part of the benefit of having the software installed in their environment is data doesn't have to leave their, virtual four walls. It all stays within their environment. So
So
that's
it
one.
stays in their cloud estate. So basically, you install it inside their cloud estate, and it doesn't have to leave their cloud estate. And then, so what's the licensing model? It's like an enterprise. It sounds like an enterprise software play.
We have both. We have both in that model, more of a focused, I need, let's say, data quality assessments, which is a module of our software model. And then we also have an enterprise model where, hey, we're going to bring lots of people to the party, and we want to use this a lot across the enterprise. We have both models that exist. Sometimes pharma companies don't need that. Sometimes they're saying, or sometimes the need is very focused. Sometimes the need is broad. We have both models that exist.
So for an enterprise license, it's what? It's like, like Oracle charging for a database. You buy
Yeah,
it, and then you pay me a maintenance fee, something like that.
yeah, you buy it. Yeah, you buy it and you have an ongoing cost. We're not really driven by the old view of user-based of value. We think that the new world is going to be driven more by productivity versus, hey, every single time I have a user, I'm going to get a big bill. We don't want that to cause pain for our customers, nor do we think that's important. Because if you have one person leveraging Cornerstone and they're able to get 50 times the output that they previously did, that's good for the customer, and we're happy about that. We are not trying to constrain that aspect of the value creation. In fact, we think that's like one of the primary alignment points between the customer and us is productivity.
Right, and not charging per seat, which is always annoying. And also you can scale with the customer by selling them an enterprise license. You could also, I don't know if you do this, but you could also charge them for maintenance, which is what the old enterprise software model had, which is they pay you a lot of money for the license, and then you charge them another 15% a year for maintenance, which gives you some ongoing cash flow, and the customer feels like you're taking care of them.
Right, right. So that's one primary model. I would say the other model is what I would call services enabled by software. So we have a number of customers that are very excited about the capability of Cornerstone's system. They see the output in performance, like I mentioned, like through sharing their data and seeing an A versus a B. But ultimately, they're not interested in getting trained on our software. What they care about is a very precise target that they're trying to hit. So a great example of that might be the Komodo Health laboratory data example that we talked about earlier, where they're bringing data to the party, and we're improving that data, and they're not getting exposed. We're not training anyone on the software. The ultimate output is being created by our software. We're effectively, you could call that, I guess, a services model enabled by software. So that could be a Komodo Health. That could also be a large pharma company like J&J that might say, hey, I want to harmonize 50 clinical trials, and I don't need my team to do it. I want you to do it. I don't want it to take 5 years. Uh, you know, Several weeks sounds much better than 5 years. You guys do it, leveraging your software, and let's make it output oriented. Give
Got it.
me the output faster and higher quality.
Tell me something. I mean, I having been down this path a few times myself in some of my previous companies. Do you find that having, two like almost two separate business units. So you have like a software business unit that's selling licenses and support and maintenance, and you have like a service business, which is basically heads. I've always been curious about this because I've never seen service professional services business produce outstanding software, and I've never seen outstanding software companies produce outstanding professional services. It's almost like you. It's almost like over time, companies have to decide what they do. So what's your thinking on that? Am I wrong, or is that just, am I prejudiced, or is that something, are you feeling that yourself? Let me ask you directly.
I don't think we find a tension between the two at this point in our business. And I think that's because the ways that we support customers on the services side are very discrete. I think if we found ourselves supporting customers on the services enabled by software side became less discrete, that's where you start feeling a tension of, are we a services company? Are we a software company?
Right.
But we're pretty deliberate about making the scope on this side, and this side meaning the services enabled by software side, as very discrete. So like, let me make this discrete can be a conceptual thing for people. So like for LOINC assignments, the deliverable is a column with Cornerstone's LOINC assignments. That's not going to turn into a large consulting project. That is a deliverable at a date pre-specified in a contract.
It's an outcome.
It's an outcome. And
Right.
so because we have that orientation of discreteness, we have not felt that tension between identity of, are we a services or a software
So I'm
company?
wishing you to keep that idea in mind. Okay, don't forget that.
Yeah. No, actually, I've spent a good amount of my career in services, so I'm very
I think
I'm
you're aware of it. I think you're
I'm
you're yeah.
yeah, I'm very well aware of it. By the way, I don't think that businesses think you can have a great company that is, very. I've seen professional services as a big part of the healthcare industry. I also think part of why I'm so keen, having been on that side, I see so much inefficiency. And I think that, you know, I think there's a great opportunity to, to use the word friction again, to take a lot of the friction out and improve the lives of our end customers.
Absolutely. And that's a great intro to the last question, which is kind of like an interview question. When you went to a job interview, they would say, "Oh, where do you want to be in 5 years?" Okay. What are three things you want to do for your customers in the next 12 months?
For our existing customers, we want to continue to have them save a substantive amount of time. Time is one scarce resource you do not get back. We've saved them a considerable amount of time to date, but we want that to continue. We think that is incredibly important in healthcare, where we're ultimately serving patients and time is not our friend. We also, for our existing customers, want to, bless you, ensure that bless you.
Yeah. Air conditioning is too high. Okay. And so saving time, that's the first thing. So you want to get better at that, or you want to focus on that? What?
We want to continue to enable time savings and improved output for our existing customers. So I would say that's a core area of, and that's how they obtain value from us. So that would be one.
Number
Another
two.
Number two is our product itself, and the scaling of our product is something that is on top of mind for us in the next 12 months. So there's a certain amount of data that our system handles today. We're continuously thinking about how do we scale that to match the scale of data that our customers have. So that would be another thing that is top of mind. We've improved it so far in the past couple of years by orders of magnitude, but we know there's more to go, just given the enormous scale of healthcare data that exists in the world. So that would be number two. And then number three would be, oh, sorry, you had a question on number two?
No, 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 I get it. I get
Okay.
it.
And
Yeah.
then number three would be some new products that we're launching, particularly we're really excited about some of the products that we're launching that are more directly in the trial space versus the real world space, and where real world and trial is increasingly merging into one. We're really excited about that in the next 12 months, and we think that's going to create a lot of value for our end customers.
For example, like recruitment data, something like that,
For example, leveraging and QCing healthcare, electronic healthcare record data
or
for
recruiting
trials.
for
And
recruiting patients.
for not for recruiting patients, but when we think about the um, when we think about the increased use of electronic healthcare record information for trials and a lot of the work that's being done to um, move away from the legacy system of looking at charts and re-entering information, we think that that space is ripe for Cornerstone system, leveraging our system to accelerate things like quality checks, harmonize across different sites, effectively be a meta layer across this new movement to leveraging electronic health records.
Interesting. Um, I'm just curious. So what's the value prop for for a pharma doing a clinical trial, say doing a phase 2 or phase 3?
It and perhaps this is an unsatisfying answer, but it comes back to a lot of the core dimensions of how we help on the real world data side, which is time savings and improve data quality. I'll give you like a prime example of this. So after the last patient is enrolled to when you can start analysis, that's like that is ripe in that space that we operate. And today that can be anywhere from last patient enrollment to start of analysis. It can be anywhere from 8 weeks to 12 weeks. That's too long. That's too long. We can bring that time down. And some of that is core operational work that is between sites and either a CRO or the pharma company, but some of that is smarter and more intelligent error resolution, for example.
Right.
And we haven't approached that space as intelligently as we could. So we think that there's an opportunity to bring down that time. So it's time savings with identifying the errors that matter. So future-proofing your trial, which ultimately for a pharma company is your product. It's the most important thing for future innovation and growth. You want to make sure that what you're submitting to regulators, you have the highest confidence in.
Yeah, and also not to forget, because it's actually incredible how little data science pharmas do with their actual clinical trial data, and I think it's sort of a place where we need to remind the our audience of listeners in our community of life science companies that your clinical data is your core IP, and that there's no
This
other.
this is such a great point. I remember when a couple of companies ago, we were working with a pharma company and we were excited about the idea of leveraging some of their clinical trial data for secondary use, not primary use, right? This is secondary use. So the data would be in a different form than primary use because it's inherently different when it's for secondary use. And the pharma company didn't have access to the data. And they not only didn't have access to the data, it sat with the CRO. And to explore the secondary use case that we were interested in, they directed us to work with the CRO. It was the most bizarre thing, to me at least, because here I was thinking, okay, you're the sponsor, you're paying for the trial. Shouldn't that be within your four walls? Shouldn't this be something that you're actively thinking about? And this was now, okay, 5, 7 years ago. I do think some of the mindset has changed. A lot of the pharma companies have launched big efforts to take this primary use clinical trial data and move it into secondary use for addition, so you have databases that you can hit for multiple questions and accelerate clinical development. But I do think a little bit of that legacy mindset still does exist of, okay, what can we do? What can't we do? If we have a CRO operating the trial, how is that going to work? And it always uh, does not fail to surprise me how these little nuances in legacy process end up slowing down things that seem so obvious to improve healthcare, but are not happening.
Well, so I mean, you're doing a great job, and you're pushing the needle in so many places. Um, it's a great time to wrap up. So I've had the privilege and pleasure of speaking with Viraj, who's CEO of Cornerstone AI, using AI to clean real world data. Now we've heard, and beyond that, into the clinical trial space uh, for additional applications. My name is Danny Lieberman. I'm the host of Life Sciences Today. And look for us at on all of your favorite podcast channels on Apple and Google and YouTube and Spotify. And Viraj, share your URL with our listeners. You are cornerstone.ai.
AI.
Exactly. So it's easy. Cornerstone.ai, and we'll be posting this in a few weeks. I had no idea how much work was involved into preparing a podcast, but that's going to be my next startup, I think, my next AI.
Thanks so much for having me, Danny.
Thank you for being my guest.